So this is a long way of explaining that the anthropologist in the human terrain system joins this 5-member team, which is called an HTT, a human terrain team. So the human terrain system has human terrain teams in it, HTTs. The team then is comprised of military advisors, so you've got people who are from the military in it, and a cultural analyst, so somebody who is native to the area, supposedly. So you've got somebody from the area. So let's say you're in the outskirts of Baghdad. So you have somebody who is native to the area, the outskirts of Baghdad, to that particular group. Okay, we've got that person. And we've got a military person. And we've got our anthropologist. That's 3. And we have a couple of other folks who come along, probably from inside the military. And according to McFate, ultimately, she ran a program of about 700 people. Of those 700 people, 100 or so were anthropologists. So she did pretty well. I mean, that's not bad. That's 1 in 7. And presumably a number of those extra sort of, the reason it wasn't 1 in 5 is that she needed more military support. But this is the idea. So you have these teams that are sort of composed of, so if you've got a soldier who, let's say, has had some social science training, you might say, okay, we're detaching you and attaching you to this HTT, this human terrain team, and you are going to support this anthropologist doing whatever she wants you to do or he wants you to do. And so you'll be military, but also you have the social science background, which is what we're interested in. Okay, fine. So the anthropologists get out into the field without endangering the military that they're with. This is one of the main stipulations. So you can't say, like the psychologist, goes out into the field in Hurt Locker and he doesn't know what he's doing. So, he's wandering around the battlefield and they're like, so the Jeremy Renner character says, okay, Colonel, let's go. And Bluey, right? So you have to go out without endangering the troops. So the troops shouldn't be made to, you sit down to talk on the floor of somebody's house to talk with a family, and you're there after dark. It's like, okay, you're endangering the team because you can't be out after dark. So if it's safe, then you may be able to stay with the locals, which is ideal in participant observation. You don't want to have to come and go every day because it's going to it's going to bring attention to you. You don't want attention on you. You want to be able to pay attention to them. You want to disappear into the background. Okay. The anthropologist then is in the position of being a double outsider, right? Because they have been recruited by the HTS, but they are not military, right? This is a civilian. You can give them some training. They gave them a couple of weeks of training. It's like, okay, don't do this, this will get you killed. Okay, always have your armor on. I don't care if it's too hot, and that kind of thing. So you train them, but they're basically embedded, just like the journalists are. And in many ways, journalists are anthropologists. I mean, that's part of the issue of media studies. So they're also outsiders when they go out, right? Because they're not from there. They may be Arabists, for instance, and they might speak some of the languages. But in some of the regions, there may be a whole bunch of languages which nobody speaks from the team. And in Afghanistan, they will speak Pashto or Farsi, sometimes called Dari. They may speak Arabic, they may speak Kurdish, and they're going to be different dialects, which may be indistinguishable depending on where you are, or they may be very distinguishable so that you can actually understand, from like 50 miles away, you can understand the people you're talking to, even though 50 miles back where you were, you could understand them. So these dialects can really kill you. So you have to, ideally, you have to have people who know the language. You can't just go in and start, signing and saying, I want a cup of tea. It's like, no, that's not going to work. The other major issue that social scientists embedded effectively with the military has is who's the client. Because does the anthropologist answer first to the needs of the people or to the needs of the U.S. military? Right now, we could say, well, the U.S. military is paying for it, so they're the client. At the same time, the anthropologist is by training an anthropologist, specifically, that is dealing with the anthropos, people. So let's say you're an anthropologist in the field, and you hear the women take you into their, if you're a woman, and the women take you into their confidence and say, man, we're all in danger because after a couple of months, and they begin to trust you, and they say, well, we're all in danger because of that local guy who's trying to get in with the warlords, and he's keeping weapons in his house, and oh my God, it's very dangerous for all of us. Okay, so now you've gotten to know these people, and you're like, oh, I really care about them. And if I go to the military and I say, there's a cache of weapons here, they're going to raid the house. Well, where did they get the information? Could only have come from me. So, who is the client? Because it's going to shift as your emotions and your loyalties shift to the people you're working with, and you begin to sympathize with them and see their problems. You think, well, what did the U.S. military ever do for me? I mean, screw the U.S. military. I see them as being basically, at best, sort of, kind of like, not good at their jobs. But at worst, they actively want to kill people I know. So, what the hell is that about? Who are just looking for safety, because you begin to understand what's going on. So in the AAA, which is the American Anthropological Association, there in 2012, there's a statement on ethics, because most associations, like the American Psychological Association, the APA, which you probably know because at some point you probably had to use the APA reference system to do a paper. Well, the APA has a list of ethics, and the AAA has a list of ethics, and so on. Most professional organizations, apart from medical ones, have ethical statements. Lawyers do. Accountants do. Professional associations librarians tend to have and create for themselves ethical statements. Okay, or statements a bit like, this is what we consider good conduct to be. So in case you're worried, you're not sure about whether you should do this or that, it's like, I'll go and look it up. It says, oh, don't do this. Okay, fine. So you'll remember that cast your mind back now, I can't remember how many weeks, to the Hippocratic Oath. This goes back to Vietnam. And remember that the original Hippocratic Oath, which has been replaced by the Statement of Geneva, began, first, do no harm. Right? So the first thing the physician has to do is make sure that you don't make a situation worse, and that you don't take the chance that you've got to kill a person, that you don't use the power of the medical knowledge that you have to put a person to death, either accidentally or in any way, basically, because whether you agree with them or not, whether you agree with their politics, whether you hate them, doesn't matter, right? That's ethics. So, in fact, in the statement in the AAA, the second section is entitled Do No Harm, because very often when you're dealing with ethics, the same issues keep coming up. So basically, you can go to one group's ethics statement and say, this looks pretty reasonable. Let's just modify it a little bit for what we do. So you can borrow a lot of the language, because the language is tricky, and there are a lot of things you don't necessarily see. So there is the same kind of ethical guideline for the anthropologist that there is for doctors. Okay, well, it's good to know. Well, what happens if you're working in the field and you discover that maybe you start to doubt, say, the good intentions of the people you're working with? Maybe you begin to believe, as you study the subjects, basically, that are yours, that actually this is maybe not going to be so good for you. Now, what do you do? And this happens. It happens a lot. Where anthropologists are like, I have to leave. It's too dangerous for me to stay. Anthropologists get killed in the field. Yeah, it happens. These are some of the problems about which you need to be aware when we talk about human terrain human terrain teams.